Good day, everyone. 'Tis I, the Blue Baron, defender of traditionalism. Vites Traditio Monarchia!
And I'm Manfred, his red-tailed hawk.
Today we'll be continuing from where we left off in our last review, and looking at, among other things, Gertie the Dinosaur. As I said last time, the works of J. Stuart Blackton and Emile Cole inspired other artists to start experimenting with animation. Most of these artists' animations were little more advanced than phantasmagory, but one man stood out above the crowd.
Walt Disney?
No, but this man could easily be seen as Walt Disney's predecessor. I'm talking about Winsor McCay. This man was easily the best animator of the 1910s. His realistic animation and sheer attention to detail was far ahead of his time, and would go unmatched until the Disney Studios came to prominence in the 1930s with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Inspired by flip books his son brought home, Winsor McCay came to see the potential in animated films, and in 1911 released Little Nemo, an animated film using the characters from his comic strip of the same name. However, most of the film's 11-minute running time is made up of a live-action sequence in which McCay bets his colleagues that he can make drawings that move. He wins the bet with 4 minutes of animation in which the Little Nemo characters perform, interact, and metamorphose to McCay's whim. The film's success motivated Mr. McCay to hand-color each of the animated frames of the originally black-and-white film. It also led him to devote more time to animation, and just a year later he came out with his next film, titled How a Mosquito Operates, in which a giant, naturalistically animated mosquito sucks the blood of a sleeping man. This film was also met with a large success, and audiences found his animation so lifelike that he was accused of tracing the characters from photographs or resorting to tricks using wires. To show that he had not, he chose for his next film a creature that could not be photographed, a brontosaurus.
Don't you mean a Apatosaurus?
No, I don't. Although the type species B. exilis had long been considered a species of the closely related Apatosaurus, more recent research has proposed that Brontosaurus is a genus separate from Apatosaurus that contains 3 species, B. exilis, B. yanapin, and B. parvis. But I digress. The main production of this new film, titled Gertie the Dinosaur, began in mid-1913. Working in his spare time, McCay drew thousands of frames of Gertie on 6.5 by 8.5 inch, or 17 cm by 22 cm, sheets of rice paper, a medium good for drawing as it did not absorb ink. And as it was translucent, it was ideal for the laborious retracing of backgrounds, a job that fell to art student neighbor John A. Fitzsimmons. The drawings themselves occupied a 6 by 8 inch, or 15 cm by 20 cm area of the paper, marked with registration marks in the corners to reduce jittering of the images when filmed. They were photograph mounted on large pieces of stiff cardboard. McCay was concerned with accurate timing and motion. He timed his own breathing to determine the timing of Gertie's breathing, and included subtle details such as the ground sagging beneath Gertie's great weight. McCay consulted with New York museum staff to ensure the accuracy of Gertie's movements, but unfortunately the museum staff were unable to help him find out how an extinct animal would stand up from a lying position. So in a scene in which Gertie stood up, McCay had a flying lizard come on screen to draw away viewers' attention.
Very clever.
I'll say. Good show, good show. Gertie the Dinosaur first appeared as part of McCay's vaudeville act in early 1914. It was later shown in movie theaters in an edition with a live-action prologue distributed by William Fox's Box Office Attractions Company from December 28th. Hard as this is to imagine today, dinosaurs were still new to the public imagination at the time of Gertie's release. A brontosaurus skeleton was put on public display for the first time in 1905, less than 10 years before. Advertisements reflected this by trying to educate audiences. According to science, this monster once ruled this planet. Skeletons are now being unearthed measuring from 90 feet to 160 feet in length. An elephant should be a mouse beside Gertie. Some differences appear between the version Mr. McCay used as part of his vaudeville act and the version that appeared in theaters. The main difference being that, like in Little Nemo, a live-action sequence was shot in order to open the theatrical version, in which Mr. McCay used a bet as a plot device. As the film opens, McCay and friends suffer a flat tire in front of the American Museum of Natural History. They enter the museum, and while viewing a brontosaurus skeleton, McKay wagers a dinner that he can bring a dinosaur to life with his animation skills. The animation process and its 10,000 drawings, each a little different from the one preceding it, is put on display, with humorous scenes of mountains of paper, some of which an assistant drops. When the film is finished, the friends gather to view it in a restaurant. The animated portion then begins, and Mr. McKay calls for Gertie, with the frisky, childlike dinosaur appearing from a cave. Her whip-wielding master has her do tricks such as raising her foot or bowing on command. When she feels she has been pushed too far, she nimps back at her master. She then cries when he scolds her, and he placates her with a pumpkin. Throughout the act, prehistoric denizens such as a flying lizard continually distract Gertie. She tosses a mammoth in the lake when it teases her by string or with water. She hurls a boulder at it as it swims away. After she quenches her thirst by draining the lake, McKay has her carry him off stage while he bows to the audience. Winsor McKay would later begin work on a follow-up to Gertie titled The Sinking of the Lusitania, as a U.S. war propaganda piece after the sinking of the British liner in 1915, in it adopting Earl Hurd's method of cell animation, which saved work by allowing dynamic drawings to be drawn on one or more layers, which could be laid over a static background layer, relieving animators of the tedium of retracing static images onto drawing after drawing. The Sinking of the Lusitania was Mr. McKay's largest and most ambitious project yet, but he was forced to do it on his own time with his own money, as his employer, William Randolph Hearst, was opposed to the U.S. joining World War I and wanted Mr. McKay to illustrate anti-war and anti-British editorial cartoons for his newspapers. As a result, even with help from his assistants and the time-saving new method of cell animation, it took McKay 22 months to complete the film before it was released in 1918. And of course, by that time, the U.S. had already entered the war, and the shock of the Lusitania's sinking had long passed. This likely had the largest impact on why this film was not a commercial success. It was supposed to be a newsreel-like propaganda piece that played to American shock at the recent event. But by the time it was released, the event it portrayed was no longer recent or newsworthy. Because of the film's lack of commercial success, McKay's subsequent animation output suffered from increased setback, and his employer, Mr. Hearst, put increased pressure on him to devote his time to editorial drawings. However, McKay continued to produce animated films using cells, and by 1921 he had completed 6, though 3 were likely never shown commercially to audiences and have survived only in fragments. These are The Centaurs, Flip Circus, and Gertie on Tour. In 1921, he released 3 films based on Dream of the Rarebit Fiend: Bug Vaudeville, in which insects and other creepy crawlies perform on stage; The Pet, in which a creature with a bottomless appetite grows enormously and terrorizes the city in a way reminiscent of King Kong; and The Flying House, in which a man attaches wings to his house to flee from death. After 1921, McKay was made to give up animation when Mr. Hearst learned he had devoted more of his time to animation than to his newspaper illustrations. Unexecuted ideas McKay had for animation projects included a collaboration with Jungle Imps author George Randolph Chester, a musical film called The Barnyard Band, and a film about the Americans' role in World War I. McKay's biographer, animator John Canemaker, called The Sinking of the Lusitania a monumental work in the history of the animated film. Admired by his animation contemporaries, Canemaker wrote that it did not revolutionize the film cartoons of its time, as McKay's skills were beyond what his contemporaries were able to follow. In the era that followed, animation studios made occasional non-fiction films, but most were comedic shorts lasting no more than 7 minutes. Animation continued in its role of supporting feature films rather than as the main attraction, and rarely received reviews. What?
Nothing. It's just, these animations are finally getting reviews over 100 years after they came out.
How fitting, then, that I be the one to review them, for I do not live in the past, but rather I endeavor to bring the past to the present in order to provide for a better future. But back to Gertie the Dinosaur. Unlike Phantasmagoria, Mr. McKay's animation in Gertie the Dinosaur holds up extremely well, even by today's standards. Indeed, McKay's animation was the best of its time, and was actually of a far higher quality than most of the animation that came out afterwards. McKay's first three films were the earliest animated works to have a commercial impact. Their success motivated film studios to join in the infant animation industry. Other studios used McKay's combination of live action with animation, such as the Fleischer Studios series Out of the Inkwell from 1919 to 1929, and Walt Disney's Alice Comedies series from 1923 to 1927. McKay's clean line, high contrast, realistic style set the pattern for American animation to come, and set it apart from the abstract, open forms of animation in Europe. This legacy is most apparent in the feature films of the Walt Disney Animation Studios. For example, in Fantasia, 1940, which, like Gertie, included dinosaurs animated in a naturalistic style, with careful attention to timing and weight. In fact, these dinosaurs tended to draw more of their quality from Gertie than from any of the dinosaurs that were animated after her, from the 1920s to the 1930s. Also interesting was the fact that Fantasia also included a segment with centaurs, something which McKay had also done a film on. Gertie's reputation was such that animation history has long named it as the first animated film. As we now know, it wasn't the first animated film to be made. However, it was the first animated film for many other things. It was the first animated film to have a compelling character with a personality. The first animated film to feature dinosaurs, and arguably the best one to do so until Fantasia. And it was also the first animated film to captivate the public's imagination to such an extent that not only does it remain in the public mind today, but it also had a large impact on the works that followed it. Seamus Culhane, David Max Fleischer, Walter Lantz, Otto Mesmer, Pat Sullivan, Paul Terry, and Bill Tidlow were among the generation of American animators who drew inspiration from the films they saw in McKay's vaudeville act. However, Mr. McKay wasn't all that impressed with their work. In 1927, Winsor McKay attended a dinner in his honor in New York. After a considerable amount of drinking, McKay was introduced by animator Max Fleischer. McKay gave the gathered group of animators some technical advice, but when he felt the audience was not giving him attention, he berated his audience, saying, "Animation is an art, that is how I conceived it. But as I see, what you fellows have done with it is making it into a trade. Not an art, but a trade. Bad luck." That September, he appeared on the radio at WNAC, and on November 2nd he was interviewed by Frank Craven for the Evening Journal's Woman's Hour. During both appearances, he complained about the state of contemporary animation. I can certainly sympathize with his view on animation, especially since recently the very same thing has happened to it. Instead of having beautifully drawn, artistic, traditional animation, we now have, for the most part, entirely computerized 3D animation, often for no other reason than the fact that it's cheaper. I'm reminded of a scene from Garfield and Friends back in the 1990s, which demonstrated considerable foresight on this subject.
This is where all those people sit doing all those drawings?
Drawings? Other studios have people doing drawings. Here, we do it all by computer. It's modern, it's efficient, and it saves a lot of money. Am I right?
Are the cartoons better?
Nah, but you can't have everything.
At any rate, despite the many animators drawing inspiration from Mr. McKay, they were never quite able to replicate his level of detail and realism, and for a long time animation was relegated to short cartoons such as Felix the Cat, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Mickey Mouse, and the Looney Tunes, before finally, based on Windsor's detail and realism, the 12 principles of animation were thought of by Disney's old men in the 1930s, allowing for Disney to begin their long line of feature films with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. I'm the Blue Baron, defender of traditionalism. God bless you all, and remember, Fides Traditio Monarchia! Good day, everyone. 'Tis I, the Blue Baron, defender of traditionalism. Let's try that once more.
What did you hit?
I hit the top of the desk.
You're thinking, Maxine, we smashed the camera? It's like, okay, we're done.
Yes,
That would really suck.
it would. Alright. Good day, everyone. 'Tis I, the Blue Baron, defender.
What's the matter?
It triggered me. Alright.
What triggered you?
Hitting that.
Come on, hurry up.
Alright. Just a moment.